Most art is pretty bad. Most paintings, most sculpture, most literature, most music is lousy.
To Plato, art was the imitation of nature, but in the 19th century, photography took over that function, and in the 20th, abstract art overturned the whole notion that art was about representation at all. This new style of painting, known as abstract expressionism, first became associated with America after World War II. It began in New York during the 1940s and was the first specifically American art movement to achieve international influence, causing New York City to become the center of the art world. This sudden shift in the world's center of artistic gravity from Paris to New York was largely unexpected, occurring only within a few years. In the beginning, abstract expressionists were mocked and their paintings were viewed as ugly. But in the end, they managed to completely shatter the current styles of the most advanced painters in Europe. Through these events, this new generation of artists and their innovative styles withstood the tragedies of the World War II era and triumphed in achieving global supremacy around the world.
Shortly before 6 a.m. on Friday, September the 1st, 1939, German forces crossed the border into Poland after a huge aerial and land bombardment.
This all began when modern artists fled Europe in the late 1930s due to Nazi intolerance. They were displaced as a result of the sheer destruction the war had brought. What was once their home was no more than a pile of rubble. So they left. They left Europe seeking safety in the United States. During this time, the U.S. had not been directly involved in World War II yet, until the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941.
One of the bombs dropped within 50 feet of KTU Tower. It is no joke, it is the real war.
When thousands of troops left home from Europe and Asia, the American public was bombarded with shocking images and descriptions of suffering, death, and destruction. Artists from Europe encountered a population whose culture had been affected by both wars, the stock market crash, and the Great Depression. They were overwhelmed with the despair these events had brought. And suddenly, their views on art changed. No longer did they paint elaborate sceneries that captured the beauty of the world. They did not see any beauty at all. Major artists at the time, such as Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko, began creating paintings that were completely non-representational. This meant that they didn't really look like anything at all. The paintings contained expressive and lively brushstrokes that were packed with strong messages and overwhelming emotion. With their art, they stretched the limits of what was possible to do. This new technique completely rejected the idea that the artist must communicate something, but instead make a statement of its own as if there were no subject matter at all. Abstract expressionists strove to uncover feelings directly through making art. But, like most other major art movements, it gained mixed reactions from art critics and the public. Artists were continuously torn between their own independent objectives, the pressures of society, and the war that called for purposeful political art. As such, American art and its artists took on a confusing, tense relationship with the government and general politics. Moreover, it was common for artists to use their skills in creating propaganda in the war effort. But abstract expressionists had no such desire, and they were willing to wage ideological war on behalf of the capitalist system. What they faced was hostility, not indifference, ridicule, not grants from the government. They had every right to suppose that public acceptance of their art was not a realistic possibility. These artists risked everything on a form of painting that meant nothing to the general public. They were not only mocked by the press, but also completely ignored by museums. Nevertheless, abstract expressionists were very serious about art, and the strength of their resistance would consequently lead to respect and acceptance in American society. By the 20th century, art changed with a purpose it never had before. After the Nazi invasion, abstract expressionism began to dominate the world, causing this form of art to represent both the political and psychological shift in America's population. This new art style showed that the US was culturally up to date in competition with Paris. Being abstract provoked more written theory and criticism than any previous generation had done before. Paris was no longer the center of the art world. While at first their art was widely misunderstood, it eventually came to represent powerful liberation not only for American artists, but also American society. They rebelled against Cold War politics, representing a solidarity of American freedom.